Afternoon's Health and Wellbeing Board. As ever, we will have a theme to the meeting. Today it's children and young people. It's all part of our Health and Wellbeing Board's seeing health in all policies forward plan way of working, and our efforts to get further into the wider determinants of health and exploring therein. You recall that this is the third meeting that's themed in this way. We had one in September, which was on transport, one in November on the built environment. So today, children and young people. I won't reiterate what's going to be coming up on the agenda. It'll be obvious to people for having seen the papers. But certainly, we'd always like to point people to the key lines of inquiry that we've developed for people to think about. I know the speakers have been asked to talk to those key lines of inquiry in mind, particularly around improvements to health, addressing inequalities, etc., etc. And those are reproduced in the papers for people to see. So, without more ado, I should go on to just, as I said, I've started the welcoming. I've got a few apologies for absence. Laura Sharp, unfortunately, can't be with us. Councillor Bramble and Anne Canning, I know you have to leave around 5 o'clock, so we note that already. I should also note that Alistair Wallace is unable to attend the meeting today, voluntary sector rep. And in fact, unfortunately, this would have been his last meeting. He's been on the board for 5 years, and for that level of service, I thank him enormously. And I know that CVS are in the process of recruiting a replacement, and that hasn't concluded yet. But we have a couple of colleagues who've joined us. I think Liz Hughes and Peter Merrifield, who will be on panel, which I'll bring in if I can as we go along. And we have a number of other people, including a couple of members from the public who've got questions today. So I think we should just quickly see if there are any declarations of interest that anybody particularly wants to bring to our attention, or items on the agenda. No. Okay, thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting. Anybody have any comments or issues they want to bring up from the minutes? No, in that case, I'll take them as agreed. Thank you very much. The action log, we have 4 actions on that. I'm just struggling with the IT that's misbehaving. Donna, could you just quickly share the action number 1? I know action number 2 is in process. Number 1, I'm just going to try and get hold of.
Yeah, just to say, action 1's now closed, so HCVS are going to report back to Health and Wellbeing Board in the upcoming months on the progress of that resilience strategy, so that's underway.
Thank you very much. It's now, I've got it in front of me, so number 2 is in progress. I know number 3. And it has your name next to it. I wondered whether you had any update just briefly for us at this stage about convening the group that you described here on the 3rd action.
So this is the partnership group. Yeah.
Yep, partnership-wide children and families plan.
Yes. So we haven't convened it. I'm just trying to, but we have set up a structure within the council to garnish all the learning that we've already got from partners and other pieces of work before we go to the next stage. So it is in hand, and the strategic work in the council is happening before we go out to our partners. There is a slight issue of timing. The pressure on the service both because of the cyber attack added to the pressure on the system across because of COVID lockdown 3. So it is moving forward.
Okay, fine, thank you, Anne. So I guess we will think outside the meeting in terms of a sort of timeline on that.
Yeah.
Okay, and number 4 is in action, and obviously has a completion date of April. So that's that. Unless anyone else has any comments. Good. So with that, can I turn us to community voice section, item 6. John Williams, I understand you're going to run this as a Q&A with Anne-Marie Dawkins. shall I leave you to do the introductions? As I was saying to other members, panelists, we are pretty tight for time today, so we have the 15 minutes for you. So take it away.
And firstly, I'll have to give apologies from Anne-Marie, who's had to step away from coming to this meeting due to a very bad headache. So I'm going to just speak on her behalf. That will probably speed up the session, Mark. So without more ado, I'll read out. She shared a statement with me, and I'll read that out.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Okay, so I think firstly, just a comment. We need to see this in the context of COVID and the impact on disabled people. We know that disabled people's have had a brutal experience in COVID, and their inequalities have significantly worsened. So we do see, so speaking to Anne-Marie, we do kind of see this child-friendly approach very important. It's about making sure that disabled people are involved really in this borough properly and fully and genuinely. So I'll read out Anne-Marie's statement now. So, okay, her name is Anne-Marie. She is a single parent of 3 children born and raised in Hackney, including a son with autism and a learning disability. She's the co-chair of HIP, Hackney's independent forum for parents and carers of disabled children. The forum subscribes and supports the social model of disability, which I think you're familiar with. The model understands disabled people are disabled by barriers to society and not by their impairment or difference. She co-founded the Parent Carer Forum in over 2009-10 with other carers in response to the launching of the Aiming High for Disabled Children, which has launched short break funds for disabled children for the first time. They ran a big consultation on how the fund should operate. It is excellent that you, the board, are planning a child-centred borough. However, she wants to put the case for doing so with SEND and disabled children front and centre at your planning. One size does not fit all. What works, always introduced for all children in a borough, may not work and often works against some disabled children. This is really, really important. We are asking for special treatment. It is about equity, not equality. It means that if you ask any significant change in services, budgets, road layouts, schools, housing policy, or anything, you need to consult the families of disabled children from the outset, not just as an afterthought. Our children and our families are fed up with being an afterthought or a bolt-on. Disabled children experience deep inequalities as children and adults. COVID has amplified and widened the yawning inequality chasm. Because of this, families need specialist support with special consideration. Again, not special treatment. The need is to speak to them and take up their disabled needs into account. This is enshrined in law. Too often, councils plan and implement policies that make big change with barely any thoughts to the needs of disabled children and their families. For example, the rapid introduction of low traffic arrangements in Hackney. I'm a fan, but I agree it is all good for all children and their lungs. But there is a small group of families whose children have blue badges who were hugely impacted by the change. These were mainly BME single parents with small children and disabled autistic children who cannot use public transport or walk safely for long because of the severe sensory issues. Their lives became unmanageable for a few weeks, stuck in cars for hours with a screaming autistic child in meltdown, while trying to manage the support in the family, including intergenerational caring too. The changes also impacted on bus travel for kids' playground and the school garden. These families and the organisation, along with other blue badge holders, should have been contacted long beforehand. They should have been told about the change, asked about the changes that would affect them and their families, and how additional burdens could be mitigated. Instead, they were told to suck it up by a largely able-bodied white man who did not have a disabled or autistic child and who have a bigger voice. Housing. The borough needs to provide more accessible, suitable housing for families with disabled children. We know too many families who are languishing in hostels or totally unsuitable temporary housing for years. This is because the system fails to recognise or understands their needs and due to a lack of accessible housing. Raising a disabled, autistic or learning disabled children can be tough. Decent housing is a must to enable families to support their children. Families spend too much time fighting for support, access services and their children's rights. No families have to battle in this way. In an NHSE-funded study found most families with autistic or learning disabled children and young people had suffered trauma not from having a disabled child, but because of the endless battle to get support and the gaslighting by services. Schools also play a huge part in our children's lives. Many children fail disabled children because they fail to take meaningful, reasonable adjustments or differentiation to accommodate our children. They treat them like they don't count because they bring down the school attainment. This leads to really bad behaviour by schools, exclusion, rolling off, elective homeschooling, where parents are forced to educate or risk their children being sent to a PRU. The families are being treated as the problem. It remains a low aspiration and othering of our children. They are seen as less, not normal, an afterthought and burden. My son has stopped taking music GCSE because he couldn't pass, not because he wouldn't pass, but he wanted to study and the exams regardless of the grade because he liked the music. I was overruled. The local authority must ensure schools are not discriminating against disabled children under the radar and put in place mechanisms to prevent this. For example, school improvement should prioritise this, not just exam results, but they also must fund EHCP plans properly, adequately, and make sure therapy is delivered at an adequate level. At the moment, SLT is being delivered at a sub-therapeutic levels. Disabled children and their families experience poor mental health, but they often brushed off with generic one-size-fits-all approaches in the school or in early CAMS help, with generic parenting groups. It is vital for families to have a swift and unfettered access to disability-specific and informed mental health support, especially autistic children who are often dismissed as naughty children because caused by poor parenting. It is important to reach out and to listen to the families and disabled children's organisations rather than to be more just interested in their positions, but rather having a much more constructive dialogue. To restate the importance of involving families with disabled children, this is a kind of key point, I think, really, is kind of, it's about, if you are going to be doing this work and developing these strategies, disabled children and their families need to be involved right from the beginning. And they should always be the first there in some ways, because it's making sure that the entire borough builds around them, because they're the most vulnerable in our community. And if you can build a child-friendly borough with them in mind first, then all children will benefit. Thank you.
Great, thank you, John. It's a shame we can't explore this further, but Councillor Bramble, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I'm conscious that the Mayor did indicate before I did. Mayor Glanville, did you want to respond first?
If I could, because I think I'm going to tread really carefully here, and I think I've said it before about the community voice item. In order for us to treat those comments and critique, and I think really important critique, and that is the voice of somebody very experienced in the system with, I think, a lot of challenges that we would all recognise across all of those policy areas. But we could spend, and quite rightly spend, an hour going through all of those things. And obviously our cabinet members and officers that could cover a lot of the ground of the topics talked about. And obviously underpinning all that is consultation, engagement and co-production across all of our policies. And we're here to look at health in all our policies. But I think unless the community voices section has prior notification or is thematically linked to the people on the call, we're just going to jump back and forth and take stuff away and report back. And I especially think if she'd been able to come this afternoon and then didn't feel that there was satisfaction, and I think we had that when we talked about the carers item, I just want to think maybe as co-chairs in a system how we structure this item so that we hear that loud community voice and we can channel it into change. And I'd want to channel it into change and action. And I also think, you know, it's like with scrutiny or other places where this debate, you know, we often put it in a structured way so people can feel that they're being heard and then change comes from it. And I just don't feel it's possible to do justice to everything that was said in that powerful testimony, beyond that we need to redouble our efforts to embed equity and equalities and co-production in everything that we do. And I think, you know, the Health and Wellbeing Board, as it's now currently constituted, is doing a lot more of that. Councillor Williams and I are doing a lot of work on equalities now around some of the sustainable transport stuff. But then we risk getting into a policy discussion here that we're just ill-equipped, both in terms of time and expertise, to cover off. So, but, you know, really powerful. And I'd be really open to suggestions about how we could respond. Is it a dedicated session at the Health Watch? Is it what's the route? Sorry, John, I'm putting you back on the spot because you've put me on the spot. But I really want to help, and I'm sure Deputy Mayor Bramble wants to also come in as well.
John, while you think about that, Councillor Bramble, do you want to come in with your comment now as John scratches his head?
It's that privilege that you have when someone always speaks before you, and said lots of the points I wanted to raise came up before. But if I could just take the moment to speak on behalf of Councillor Woodley, although we don't often speak on behalf of one another, in that I know that we've spoken to parents virtually of SEND parents and trying to gauge the challenges that they have across the system, and we do liaise and go to lots of meetings with parents. So I just want to say that Councillor Woodley is always open and advocating for families, and as Mayor Glanville said, happy to take away the points that was raised, but would like to know a way that we could follow it through so that people know that once what they've said is raised, have a pragmatic way and a clear way back so that people know that they're heard. How do we then ratify that the voices that you've come to us with, how do they know it's heard and made a difference through the system? And just having space for that, and a formal way, as I said, that Councillor Woodley would have wanted to absolutely be here to speak to this. But so that, yes, that's all I wanted to raise, and echo the points that Councillor Mayor Glanville has already made.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, well, I think. Firstly, about community voice, I do think it is a struggle to get it going properly, and I think a lot of that is about understanding what this board wants to do and having early notice of it, because it actually takes a huge amount of work trying to get people who want to come along this board. Essentially, they find you all quite intimidating. It's not an easy thing to do. It's even more challenging not doing it like this. So that's an issue around that, and I think as we develop the strategy for the board, how community voice links into it and works effectively is very important, because we do need the voice of people in this board, not just us. So that's a broad issue. In terms of the issues around Anne-Marie's statements, she was really wanting to just give you examples. She wasn't expecting replies right now, here and now, but she wants to have a strong dialogue between disabled people and the council and the health institutions. That's what she wants. So I think that the commitment here really is saying we will carry that forward. I will speak to Anne-Marie tomorrow and feed back to her about what was said now. And I think we would happily, from Health Watch position, facilitate a discussion with the council and health to make sure we can take this forward and make sure it's properly integrated. I don't know whether it'd be worth including you, Amy, Wilkinson, in this as well, given your work, because I think that'd be very helpful. And also because Anne-Marie is one of your public reps as well.
Yeah, sure.
Sure. And Mayor Glanville, you've put in a suggestion about convening a meeting with the council's engagement consultation team to try and really see how well we can answer some of the questions about embedding this sort of feedback in and seeing the result of the feedback and where it goes, and then obviously we can report back how that process might work in a future one of these. I think that would be helpful. Now, John, thank you very much. I'm going to move us on because I'm afraid I wasn't aware that John Thomas has to leave early. So the item, I'm going to shift the agenda around to give her as much time as we've got, and as much time as she's got, and take the questions after the early years strategy, which we did actually have 30 minutes against, and Donna's here to present and then take questions on. Donna, I don't know whether you'll be able to provide a bit more time, or maybe one of your colleagues can take over from you if you have to leave.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. Sorry, it's just I've got governors tonight, so that's why I had requested to go on quite early. But thank you anyway. And the other thing is, I apologise if I missed something. It's okay. I hope you can all hear me because I've just stepped on my headphones, so they're broken. So hopefully I'll be able to engage with you. Thank you anyway for the opportunity to put early years on the agenda and to engage the board at the very early stages of refreshing the early years strategy. In fact, you're the first stakeholders to be consulted on the principles to inform the strategy in order to get your input and endorsement in the direction of travel. The intention is to update the early years strategy by this summer. And early years, just to be aware, I'm sure you are because you've had the presentation in advance, that early years works in partnership with health colleagues across all health services and has a remit around health and well-being of children and their families. We share specific priorities with health visiting, with whom we work closely to support school readiness, sometimes referred to as a good level of development, often used interchangeably and will be used interchangeably during this presentation. Regarding, as I've said, you'll be the first group that I consult with, but the intention is to consult with the under fives strategic group, which has been paused during COVID, but will need to be resurrected again. Integrated commissioning, children and people's maternity work stream, and their underpinning groups, and obviously stakeholder groups, children's centre stakeholder groups. While I pull up the presentation, which I know you've had, and hopefully you've had some time to look at, so that you may have questions ready for me. So I'm going to talk through the early years remits and our statutory functions, talk through links with other strategies, look at baseline data gaps and emerging priorities, which I'm hoping you'll have had the opportunity to review. Right, I should be able to share that now. Okay, I put that on presentation. So early years, I can't see you. So if you've raised your hands or asked any questions, I won't be able to see that for now. So you'll have to just shout out. So early help and early years. What do we want to achieve? We want all children in Hackney to have the best possible start in their foundation years so that they can achieve their potential regardless of their starting points. We want to improve life chances and emotional well-being of every child and improve outcomes for disadvantaged children so that they develop as confident, capable and ambitious learners. And that includes children with additional needs. Well, I'm not going to talk verbatim through the case for the early help, but you've got I cited some references, some studies there in terms of the Cross-Party 1001 Days Manifesto 2014, the Marmot Review, Fair Society in 2010, the Review of Poverty and Life Chances undertaken by Frank Fields, and the study of the Early Education and Developments project. There are two key research documents that I do want to just speak to for a minute, though not too long. There were two significant studies, and that is, one of them is the EPI project, which you may have heard of. I'm sure that you will have done. It's the early provision of preschool education study of 3 and 4-year-olds in 2004. Those 3 and 4-year-olds are now at uni, and also the Claire Tickell's review of the foundation stage. So why did I want to mention the EPI report? And in fact, the study of early education development, the last bullet point on this slide, is actually the next phase from the EPI research. And that's a longitudinal study of a cohort of 3 and 4-year-olds. And what it did is it made a number of recommendations which is embedded in early years practice now. And some of those recommendations, or some of the research findings, was really about the impact of preschool education on children's outcomes in comparison with children who don't attend any early years provision. It found that children from disadvantaged backgrounds made significant gains and benefited from their provision, especially if there was a socio-economic mix. It talked about the high quality provision with graduate practitioners, graduate leaders that had the most significant impact on children's outcomes, hence the importance of our 2 nursery schools who have a role in sharing best practice. The study of the EPI project also looked at early years education and development as a continuation. So it's followed those children, as I've said, right into university, and found that actually the gains in those early years have lasted. It also found that it's the quality of early years education. It's not whether it's part-time or full-time, because actually there wasn't any research to suggest that being in nursery full-time had a better impact on children's outcomes than being in nursery part-time. Hence the 15-hour entitlement for all 3 and 4-year-olds and eligible 2-year-olds, but the 30 hours is for working parents, because that's actually about supporting the economy rather than supporting children's outcomes. And then very briefly, the Tickell review in 2011 on the Early Years Foundation, and Early Years Foundation for Life and Learning, and that updated the statutory framework to which we work to now, and it introduced the key areas for learning, but it also introduced the integrated early years and health development checks that we now do and is embedded in our practice nationally. That actually was developed on the work of Hackney. We piloted that, we trailblazed that, and the DOH, Department of Health, and the Department for Education were watching quite keenly in the work that we were doing before they rolled it out. And the reason why we started it originally was because of the low take-up of development reviews by the health visiting or at the age of 2. So that's why we started that piece of work, but it's now embedded in practice, which is a positive thing. But thinking about the early years statutory duty, what are our functions? To improve outcomes for children under 5 and their families in order to increase school readiness. I talked about school readiness and a good level of development being used interchangeably. To reduce inequalities and outcomes for children at risk of underachievement. I'll go on shortly to talk a bit more about that. We have a duty around supporting, we've got 364 providers in Hackney. Of that, 176 are childminders. And we have a remit to support in those settings to develop good practice. And actually, I think about 94% of them have been judged good or better by Ofsted. All of our children's centre nurseries, 100% of them have been judged good or outstanding by Ofsted. We also provide support to parents, setting and agencies through the Parenting and Family Information Service, and we ensure sufficient early education, childcare places, and a coordinated approach to under 5's work, working through children's centres, working with colleagues across the system, health, the voluntary sector, children and families, to promote integrated health, early education, childcare, and parenting supports. Our focus has been around, as I mentioned earlier, around the quality of early years provision, the take-up of the 15-hour and 30 hours for entitlement. We've probably got about 64% of 2-year-olds, eligible 2-year-olds, who've taken up their offer, which is actually in line with national and London averages. We've got probably about, we're waiting for the next count, we're doing the census at the moment, so I can't give you the exact, but we had at the last count about 87% of children who take up their 3- and 4-year-old entitlement. We've seen a drop because we were at some stages a few years back at 90% take up, so we're trying to unpick what that is about. We have a focus around parents accessing information that they need to scaffold their parenting, a focus around training, ensuring that children's centres are focused on improving outcomes for the most disadvantaged children and their families, with a specific focus on children who are at risk of underachievement, not achieving their full potential because of, and reducing inequalities in child development. There's a key piece of work around resilience, so working through our schools systems, our school stages from naught right up into secondary, developing attachment aware, trauma-informed settings so that we are aware of some of the vulnerabilities that children are experiencing and how that impacts on their learning. And we have a coordinated and targeted approach to children and families in need of early help. So that's just a very quick tour of the early years focus. I'm going to talk a little bit more detail around the principles that I've set here, and the principles really are to inform our strategy. So, partnership with parents has to be key. When we go back to some of the early research statements at the beginning of the presentation, we go back to the Marmot review, the Graham Allen, Frank Field reviews, that whilst parents' level of education may afford them more capacity and resources to scaffold their children's learning, it's not really about who parents are, it's about what they do that makes the biggest difference. And so home learning and us supporting them with our home learning becomes quite critical at that moment in time. We have a family information service, but we've actually extended that to become the parenting and family information service. And that's really about recognising the importance of the information that parents get to support them or to signpost them onto appropriate support if we can't offer them that support. We've bought a licence for 5 to Thrive, which is about bite-sized, accessible resources on the importance of play, talk, relax, cuddle and responding to build and maintain healthy brains and attachment. That will be slide 8 that I'll come on to. Our local birth to 5 journey, which is slide 7, we've developed that again because often as professionals we have a lot of information at our tips, but we don't always share that readily. And with more information, parents are more equipped in order to support their own children. And that's what we're trying to do, broker that relationship by sharing information and making that information accessible to them. So our Birth to 5 Our Journey framework is just that. It's about giving parents an electronic tool that they can tap into, which tells them what to expect when, what appointments their child should be accessing, what milestones they could be at, and what services are there to support them. So that's so working with parents, empowering parents, giving them the information and the resources that they need is really important to us and underpins and is embedded in all that we're trying to achieve. And then there's things such as universal stay and play, which is non-stigmatising, open to all, irrespective of background, and it is used by all our families. So I've just taken a bit of time just to unpick that principle too, which is quite important. Then going on to principle 3, Hackney Early Years will work in partnership with settings, agencies and organisations. We'll broker relationships between settings and agencies in order to develop an integrated multi-agency approach. I talked earlier about the integrated reviews that is now in the Early Years Foundation statutory practice, and that's really about early years practitioners and health visitors working with parents to undertake those development checks too. So between those practitioners who know the child, their parents who know them better than anybody else, in order to assess and appraise where that child is and what support they may need in order to accelerate their learning if they're not quite there achieving milestones. Committed to universal and targeted intervention, early intervention at the point that they need it. And then having a systemic approach, so a holistic approach to supporting families.
Sorry to interrupt you a second. I'm aware that you've had 10 minutes of your 15, and there are lots more slides because I'm very keen there should be time for questions. Okay. So you're having an incredibly rich description of lots of the work that's going on, which is terrific. But I fear there won't be time to do justice in this way to all your areas that you could speak to. So I'm just going to give you a gentle sort of hurry up. I'm so sorry, but I think that's helpful.
That's helpful. And I think you've had the document, so I won't talk to all. I mean, it was the principles that I really wanted to share with you, so I'm really pleased that you've got me there. So I've talked about our Birth to 5 framework, so I won't dwell on that. And the reason why this is here around the brain development, I think that's what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to support children to develop this. Actually, this picture is really about extreme sensory neglect. So we can see a normal, healthy brain, but an extreme neglectful brain, a brain that's sustained under stimulation. And so everything that we've done through the 5 to Thrive, the Birth to 5 Matters, the Our Journey, it's about stimulating children. It's about attachment, good attachment. It's about good brain development. And this is just here just to remind us as early years practitioners why we're here and what it is we're trying to achieve. Now, this is about the expected progress measures at 5. This is where children at the end of reception are assessed in terms of 12 areas that are actually assessed, and whether or not these skills in those children at 5, they're either there, they're emerging, they're secure, or they're exceeded. And so everything that we do is around communication, physical development, personal social, literacy, mathematical understanding of the world, support those outcomes for those children. Again, you've seen that, so you might have questions, but I won't dwell on that. And I do want to just take a minute to just dwell on this slide around the good level of development outcomes. This is the measure, at the end of reception. And when we measure all children, we can see that Hackney has been lower than the national or lower than the London averages. But when we take out our PVIs, our private, voluntary and independent settings, and we just look at our schools, we can see that 77% of children are achieving a good level of development. That's higher than national, and that's higher than London averages, if you see the little box at the bottom. So that starts to take us down a direction of travel around some of the emerging priorities. Children in our maintained schools make good progress. Children in our independents don't. But that's primary because they're not teaching in English. So it's not so much that children are not developing, it's just that the measure that is used is a measure that's based on children being in settings where they teach in English. This slide is really looking at Turkish, Kurdish, Cypriot children, and actually they make lower gains in development. So their outcomes, they become a priority for us, because when you look at Turkish, Kurdish, Cypriot children in relation to the wider cohort, they are underachieving. So that means that there's a group there that we need to do a bit of work with in terms of reaching them and supporting their outcomes. And then there's a slide around Caribbean boys. Caribbean girls are making good, reaching good level of developments. Caribbean boys are not. So again, you can see then that there are 3 areas of development: one around the children in independent schools, one around Caribbean boys, one around Turkish, Kurdish, Cypriot boys and girls. And the headline data are there, which we've spoken about, so I'm not going to go into that. Communication language literacy, the scores are lower than we would like, lower than national, lower than London. And language is really important because that's what gives the children the ability to be able to self-regulate, to build confidence, to be able to negotiate. So they need those language skills for life, and therefore we need to put a lot of resources into making sure that those children achieve the skills that they need at the time that they need them. This slide is really about the ages and stages questionnaires that the health visitors use, and it looks really great in terms of outcomes, apart from the fact that I think there's an indicator there around how robust this data is. So it's not reliable at the moment, although I know that it's on the government's dashboard. And then the other slide is around, at the moment, we're not, when Public Health England took responsibility for health outcomes, for reporting the data, it meant there's data sets that we're not getting back. And so in terms of us being able to plan and to respond to emerging need, it becomes a bit of a challenge when we don't have that data to hand. And this is data that's on the dashboard, the national dashboard. So it presents us with a bit of a challenge there.
Donna, I'm going to cut in again now because we really do need to.
I finished now.
I can see your slides because the last couple which we've seen is just the population, which we, it shows the spread of the population. I'm so sorry to have to cut in because there's obviously so much you want to say, but I need to be mindful that others will want to say, to ask a few questions about the. I know we're at a very early stage of developing the strategy. You set out much of the work that's going on, and you've also described some of the challenges. I would like just to open it up then for people to ask questions about maybe the early thinking around particularly meeting some of the challenges. So I'm looking for hands. Whilst people are considering or writing, Mayor Glanville.
Thank you. It was just a quick question, Donna, and thank you very much for the presentation. There was a graph where we saw a slight dip, I think, in the Hackney figure in comparison to the national on one of the previous slides. I think it was around overall attainment or progress, and just what may have happened, because it was a linear kind of increase before. It was a really positive direction of travel. And then the piece about Turkish, Kurdish and Cypriot young people. And I know there is work happening to take some of the lessons from the improving outcomes of young black men. But what I wasn't clear was whether that was an overall kind of at 18 level of attainment or progress, or whether it was a snapshot earlier. in those comparisons between boys and girls and some of those different ethnic groups in the Hackney average?
It is children at the age of 5, good level development assessment that's taken at the age of 5. And the dip, I think you've got your paperwork in front of you. The dip really is, what we're seeing is, and what you will be aware of is, there is falling roles in our schools. So whilst the birth rate in Hackney hasn't really fallen, there is an increase in the population in the north of the borough. And what we're seeing is falling roles, reducing roles, I should say, within our schools, and within our early year, our classes, our nursery classes within schools. But we're seeing the population go up in our independent settings. So what was happening is more children were in our nursery classes and less were in our independent settings. And what we're finding is that less children are in our maintained schools and they're increasing. So it's 50-50 at the moment. At the last count in 2019, it was almost 50-50 in terms of those children that were assessed at 5. And as I've said earlier, possibly not clear enough, children in the independent schools are not achieving a good level of development, largely because they don't teach in English. But if we have more and more children that are going to be assessed, and less in our independent school and less in our maintained school, it means that our trajectory is going to continue to fall unless we look just at the children in our school. And I don't mean that in terms of excluding the wider cohort. I just mean in terms of recognising that if we're measuring probably about 3,000 children at the end of the reception years, and 50% of those children are measured who have been in independent schools, and 50% of them are in our maintained schools, or even more are going to be in our independent and less in our maintained schools, it means that we're going to continue to see a dip in the level of children achieving a good level of development at the age of 5.
So
that's why we have 2 data sets, one for children in maintained school and one for those that are in the independent.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kennedy.
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to ask very quickly about further thinking on your Principle 8 about where we're delivering these services from, because I note that you talk about exploring broadening the role of children's centres into children and family hubs, so that the age of children who are receiving service in our children's centres is going up. And I wonder if there was a thought about working more closely with schools and the school estate, so that perhaps some more of the 0 to 5s actually received some of our services on the school estate. So there's a sort of quid pro quo about that switch of age ranges. Thanks.
Thank you. I think sometimes we undersell ourselves. So although we're badged as an under 5 service, certainly in our targeted early help service, we work with children of all ages, teenagers, school age children, and we get referrals in from school also. So I think that was really about saying, actually, we don't just work with under 5s, we work with parenting, and parents have children in all ages and stages and all phases. So I think that we almost need to just put a marker in to say we work with a wide age range of children, and actually we should do that quite intentionally, and work closely with family units, work closely with Young Hackney, and reaching children where they are. So there isn't an expectation, there's never been an expectation that we expect children to walk into our doors. We have generally gone out and reached children wherever they are, and worked with those settings, including the voluntary sector, to support those children. So if I think about some of our independent settings, we commission family support within some of those voluntary sector organisations, but what we do is build capacity. So they're at the table with us, we're offering them consultation, we're offering them the tools in order to support their children as a wider system, and not just the maintained system and the independent system. So I think it's really about using the children's centres, but working alongside the neighbourhoods, to just think about that, that place-based service, that community hub, that community services, and continuing to work collectively together, but not restrict it just to the under fives, because it's not always helpful to do so.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Donna. I'm going to, just because of the time, we've got two more hands, well, one more hand up, and I've got to have a question as well. I haven't got anything in the chat, so we'll probably need to move on at that point unless anybody has something particular to say in terms of a question. My question would be, before I bring in Misuse, who's joined us from the CVS this evening, I'm just going to cut in and say the impact of COVID. I've just had a presentation actually today at the Practitioner Forum, which many of you on this call are aware of, with the escalating rates of children being referred into child and adolescent mental health services at all tiers. And actually, there's an enormous amount of work going on in that space, and City and Hackney have got very well developed services, but nonetheless, we're seeing the consequences of children being at home, being not at school, and all the other consequences of COVID in terms of illness in their families, etc. I just wondered, in terms of another challenge, that's not going to go away anytime soon, and the consequences of the situation aren't going to go away anytime soon. I wonder what the early thinking is in terms of shaping the strategy.
So I think, yeah, we have started on that, and I think what we're quite good at is analysing and responding, finding the problem very early and trying to fix it. So what's the impact of COVID? The impact of COVID really is about our babies that are born during this time, and they may not have got the support that they have needed because community services were redirected to some degree to support where the support was needed. So there are parts of the Healthy Child programme that wasn't continued in the way that it usually is because of COVID. So we have working with the health visitors so that we would reach those parents, make contact with them, offer them support, and if they needed to come in, we have opened their doors. We've not closed during this period. We've continued to receive referrals during this period. We've continued to provide family support during this period. But we know that a priority group that has emerged are those new parents and those new children and supporting those babies. We also know that our eligible 2-year-olds are the children that are less likely to take up their free entitlement. So again, being very proactive and intentional about reaching those families. And sometimes it is about the door knocks. It is about taking the resources. In the very early stages of COVID, there were doorstops visits, not just with food packs, but also with resources, learning resources. We had to reopen the toy libraries and almost make a decision that there were some toys we wouldn't get back, just to keep those children stimulated at home. And lone parents, and I'm not talking about single parents, I'm talking about lone parents who don't have the support, who may be at home with their children, they may or may not be in school or nursery, and making sure that they are supported. So we have offered respite during this period just to give some break and support the emotional needs of some of those families, parents and children. So I think what we've just tried to do is to be reactive, but in a nutshell, it's babies born during this time and us being able to work very closely, hand in glove with a health visiting service, looking at those 2-year-olds, doing our best to make contacts, getting them in, and load parents. And obviously our vulnerable families who are in receipt of early help again. And as I've said, we continue to provide that service during this period and become very creative at providing that service also.
I think that something with time, I appreciate this early years, but I'm thinking, I guess, for the children at school, etc., it would be the siblings of those early year children, the impact on their families of COVID, I suppose. But I guess we need to wrap that, because an early year offer is obviously wrapped up within a family offer, and the families have children of other ages. But I guess that's something to explore on another occasion. I'm going to give Liz to the last comment, just a quick question from you.
Thank you. I'll be as quick as I can. Donna, I know you're working a lot with the batteries.
Liz, we can't really hear you, I'm afraid. You're very muffly and quiet.
No. I'll put it in the chat.
Right. whilst Liz is just writing her question down, Donna, I'm going to thank you because I'm sure you're going to have to shoot off promptly. So thank you for your time. I won't thank you again. Just when Liz's questions come in, we'll stop. No, Liz, I think we might have to move on, I'm afraid. Sorry about that. Let's move on because the time is pressing. Donna, thank you again.
Okay,
so
thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll have to reverse in the agenda back to the questions. So we had a couple of questions from the public. So the first from Lydia Muter, who's actually on the call as well, with us. Hi. I'm just going to quickly read it out though. I'm a resident of Hackney and qualified mental health first aid instructor in England. I'm writing to find out if the council has a strategy to roll out mental health first aid training for adults in the borough. Been working with the Croydon Council, delivering this training has been very successful, provides adults in the community with knowledge, skills to better understand mental health issues. You go on to talk about your experience in Croydon Council, that many people are very keen and eager to learn more about mental health. COVID-19 brought many challenges affecting all ages in terms of mental health, the impact of COVID, and you've been delivering this in the Croydon area. So you'll be very grateful if the Health and Wellbeing Board could consider providing Hackney residents with opportunities for training in mental health first aid. Now, there is a very kind of comprehensive answer, which Andrew Trathin is going to give. Andrew, hello. I was going to suggest that you give your answer up until the point where you talk about other services that also promote mental health first aid, which we could add in the minutes rather than the whole of the answer, because you've got a lot to say there. But if you just confine your answers to the specifics around the mental health first aid, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I'm Andrew Trathin. I'm consultant in public health for City and Hackney. I'd just like to thank Ms. Mitari for raising this issue. It's always so reassuring to know that there are people such as yourself who understand how important this is. And you clearly have done a lot of good work around this already. So thank you for that. And thank you for your offer of support. So mental health first aid, we do really value it in Hackney. We deliver it through our provider Mind. Our approach is to be quite targeted in who we're offering this to. So this is mainly for frontline professionals. Having spoken to the person who delivers this, just to ask how many people we've been working with so far, it's about 300, and that is across almost 100 organisations. So we feel this has got really good penetration into the community, and it's getting that skills and knowledge close to where it needs to be. And we're looking to roll that out even more widely in future, get more partners on board. So that's our overall approach. Obviously, we're continuing to monitor the situation. We're reviewing sort of how effective that is and the feedback that we get. If in future we were in a position to roll it out more on a more sort of blanket style approach, on a much wider basis, we'd obviously need to go through sort of the regular procurement processes and make sure that we're getting something that's impactful and effective and is delivering good value for money. So that would be important. So I think those are the main issues that I wanted to raise on this front. One other point is that colleagues have also considered how else we might approach the public directly in terms of providing view-only webinars online. So having considered this, it's a potential option, but we would be a little bit worried about misstepping here, because if people with particular vulnerabilities encounter these sorts of materials, it can trigger problems. And if there's no face-to-face support, that would be a concern of ours. So we opt to leave that to the specialist organisations and restrict our activity in that area to signposting and making sure that people and pointing to authoritative information that people can rely on. So yes, I'll stop there because my remaining comments were going to be around the other support that we offer to our residents.
Which I think we shall include in the minutes of the meeting because it seems sensible because they're all clearly very relevant. Lydia, did you want to just have a quick word in terms of a supplementary question? You're on mute.
And thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you for inviting me to this meeting. I'm really glad to hear that things are happening within Hackney area, and but I think unfortunately not a lot of information is out there for us to understand that this is actually happening. That's point one. And the second point is that there are people like myself who have got the experience, who have worked in that, and we would like to be, part of this promotion or increasing awareness within the barrier, because we realize how important it is, especially at this time where we have COVID. So I would like to put my hand out there and say, I want to be involved in the delivery of mental health first aid.
Thank you very much. I'm going to stop you there because we've got hands up. Thank you. Glanville. I
think Councillor Kennedy was slightly ahead of me.
No, I haven't got a hand up there. Sorry. IT, blessed thing. Go on, Christopher.
Yeah, I took my hand down and put it in the chat. I was just to say that we have a councillor champion for mental health, Councillor Anna Lynch, and in my most recent discussions with her and Andrew, we're looking at rolling out mental health first aid training for all our councillors. And I did wonder, Lydia, how the offer to the citizens of Croydon manifests itself. Is it available to all? How's it provided?
It is provided through the council because they realize that they need to support their members. So it's given to leaders within organizations, the volunteer organizations, and people who work with people so that they can support other people.
Great, thank you. Glanville.
Thank you. I'm building on what Councillor Kennedy said. We've only just reappointed a new mental health champion, a frontline councillor mental health champion from the administration, which is Councillor Lynch. And I think she's still working with Andrew and Councillor Kennedy on sort of shaping what the community-facing offer might be beyond the things that we already do. So I think it's something we'd like to return to. But I am also the co-political lead of Thrive London, which has a champions network that it helps fund and support. And I'm going to place the details for joining that in the chat. And that is a way for any Londoner in our communities, and especially focused on what are traditionally communities that have more challenging relationships with the statutory mental health network, but also people embedded, intersectionality, marginalised communities. And we're really keen to recruit more mental health champions through Thrive London. The last bit is London as a whole, all parts of London are developing what are called our recovery missions. One of the recovery missions for the Mayor of London, and I guess all of us, is to train up and deliver 200,000 wellbeing ambassadors in our communities by 2025. And again, there's a strong focus in the document I'm going to post in the chat around making sure that they are equipped to lead and shape discussions around mental health. Now that will, all of what I'm talking about probably falls slightly short of going through formal mental health first aid, because I've done a full day with that. But I think it shows that all of the kind of parts of the London system are waking up to what you're saying. And I think we're all quite reflective about how we will respond to both challenges from the bottom up from people like yourself, but also those top-down strategic missions. And I know, having done the training myself, how important it is. Hackney citizens, Hackney Islington citizens, I'll also post a link in the chat. They organise in civic society in Hackney, and they're also sort of fundraising and establishing mental health first aid training as well. So whether it's to be a part of that network or deliver it as part of that network, there may be a role for you in that. But just thank you so much for coming and tabling the question.
Thank you.
Great, thanks all. Good, thank you. In terms of tabling questions, Liz, thank you for getting that into the chat, which was basically a question which I'm sure you could ask against many of the items today, which is how CVS can be involved in shaping these things. And I could see there's Anne Canning and others have picked that up in terms of ways you can do that. And I think we'll return to that when Donna does some of her work around developing the strategy for the Health and Wellbeing Board more generally at the end of the agenda. So I'll move on to our second of our actual tabled questions, which is from Rhea Feldman. Again, I'll read it out just quickly.
Mark, I have a slide, if that would help, of the question,
Yes, pop it up and I'll summarise it. That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Mark, I had my hand up. I'm not sure that you saw it. It was just to build a bit more on Meg Glanville's point that, you know, back when Hackney first did their online cabinet sessions, one of the things that I said is that health and wellbeing has to be part of our recovery plan, and all cabinet members agreed with that. And just across the system, we're working about how to think about how we address that, whether it's through our helpline where people are just there to talk to people, and the work that we're doing in schools, thinking about our online offer for students, being able to have one-to-one sessions or group sessions. So although it's not totally related to the brilliant presentation and the good ideas, just to let you know that throughout the system we're thinking about health and wellbeing for everyone. I just thought I'd add that in. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. And yes,
Sorry,
you're right. I didn't see your hand.
It's not working, so
Don't worry.
I can read it, or you can read it.
I'm going to read it. I'll read it. So yes, Hackney Patients Not Passports, a group of Hackney residents and health workers who are concerned about access to COVID services for migrants, many of whom may be marginalised, not registered with GPs, and fearful of accessing NHS services because of NHS charging and data sharing and the hostile environment in general. So that is the background of your question, and we can know that such groups are disproportionately affected by COVID-19, and you've written that in, and you've given some references around that to explain that context, which is really helpful. Again, it'll all be in the minutes, so we can all see this context. But I'm going to move us to the question, and I'll be looking to Nicole Kleiman, another one of the public health doctors, to reply. So your question was: Public Health Hackney is Public Health Hackney taking action to ensure that no migrants are excluded from testing, treatment, or vaccination for any of the following reasons? Because they, 1, are not registered with the GP, 2, are fearful of accessing the NHS because of charging and hostile environment policies, 3, lack of information about how to access services, 4, are misinformed about COVID and relevant services, 5, believe that passports and driving licenses are required at testing sites, as stated on the government testing website when registering for testing, and 3, a lack of necessary digital access. So a great deal in that question. And again, I've just come from another meeting this afternoon where this was being discussed with colleagues across North East London. But today I'm going to ask Nicole Kleiman to pick up with the initial response. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you, and thank you for raising such an important issue. And I agree. I mean, it is an absolute challenge. An easy win is everyone who is registered with a GP. There is a very strict prioritisation order, which I've put in the response to the questions. But on marginalised groups, I think it's really important. Where people are homeless and don't have a GP, we're working very closely with homeless services, with the greenhouse practice, to get those people registered. Just to say that public health obviously is not working alone, it is working with the NHS, and we just both have clear roles around vaccination, and we are trying to support the vaccination, the communication, and work with those marginalised groups. There's also opportunities of working with our find and treat services and with homeless providers on the ground to do a registration and then to get the vaccine. So that work is ongoing. I think the bigger issue is around those more hidden groups, the migrant groups, as you suggest, those who may be rather anxious about being in mainstream services, or who've really tried to keep their head below the parapet. And we need to work with voluntary sector organisations on the ground. And that's particularly why we have commissioned Hackney Council's community champions to really try to find those marginalised groups, to see how we can register them. It's about communicating right and making it very clear that that registration with the GP for COVID vaccine is not linked to any passport services, anything to do with the Home Office. And I think that's, you know, that's the background concern clearly. We obviously are working with Doctors of the World. We've had a good relationship with them for many years, and they are producing a lot of COVID information resources in various languages that need to be shared widely. So I think, I mean, this is certainly a work in progress. I think the NHS will confirm about whether there's any opportunities for doing vaccine without an NHS number, without GP registration. I think that's something the NHS will need to reply on. But I think we've made good progress to date, but there's much more to be done with our community champions, with Doctors of the World, and with our homeless services.
Brilliant, thanks, Nicole. Brad, do you want a quick response? We've got 2 other hands up, so we'll probably take maybe, yeah.
Shall I respond to that? Thank you very much. I mean, that's exactly, I think, well, that's what needs doing in relation to the vaccine, because we understand, of course, that registration with the GP is the key, but you've actually identified the fact that people are keeping away from health services generally, or there are people who are hidden, who are worried. There's also, but what I wonder is exactly what the specific contacts that are being made with the voluntary sector and community groups. I'm chair of Hackney Migrant Centre. I volunteer nearly every week. We have a staff of about 7, and I don't know that we've been approached. And I also worry about the digital access part of the whole question, which isn't just about vaccination, but it's about knowledge and understanding about COVID. And it would be really great to see kind of posters and information in lots of languages, not just ones that sort of come to you if you're a person who gets online. So I think it's really very much that this is a very grassroots work. We'd be very happy to collaborate, and I think in any way the group of people who are health workers, voluntary sector workers, and partners in actually specific community groups.
Yeah, great, thank you. And I think that publicity is echoed in Liz Hughes' comment in the chat there about people disproportionately seeking going to private doctors because they want to avoid the NHS type. So that also echoes some of your point about saying actually how you can access services appropriately and how services need to be shaped to meet their needs. 2 hands, I think, only 1 hand now. Malcolm, I'll leave you as the last comment then, and then we move on. You're muted at the moment, Malcolm.
I do apologise. I wanted to check something about registration with GPs, because some GPs certainly in the past have asked for passports and other documents in order to register, which is the very thing that prevents people from registering because of their fear that if they do register that they're going to find themselves into deep trouble. So can we do anything to make sure that GPs are not inappropriately asking for documentation which would prevent people from seeking the support they need in relation to
This has been a challenge for a very long time. I've done lots of work on this in the past about attitudes of receptionists, about the amount of paperwork that needs to be shown, about the fixed address. I'll certainly take this back to NHS colleagues to see whether there is anything that we can do to make the process more friendly and more accessible. I think people are really put off by the amount of evidence they have to show, particularly when they're in temporary accommodation and don't even know how long they're going to be staying in that place.
I quite agree, Nicole. I mean, that we have, as the CCG chair and my capacity, we've sent out various communications to make it quite clear that that sort of material is not required to register. But that's it. You know, that it should not be referenced. And actually, it's very useful for people to feedback the names of where these interactions have occurred, and we can follow up on them. That's useful. And if people are misunderstanding the situation, we can, we explain to them.
Could I suggest that perhaps Healthwatch could do an interim view to practices across Hackney to find out what the response is to telephone calls regarding registration?
Sounds like a good idea.
We can try. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Let's move on to the next item, the Childhood Diversity Trauma Resilience Approach Update. I'm looking to Amy to present. Well, there's a lot of documentation, and I know that you're seeking today, Health and Wellbeing Board, to endorse your proposal. I know we've got about a 15-minute slot allocated, so I'll give you sort of maybe 5 to speak and 10 for questions, eh?
Yeah, sure. Okay. You'll be pleased to know that I'm not going to go through any of the documents, actually. But most of you will have seen this in various guises and various other places, recently, the Integrated Care Partnership Board. So it's really just to bring it here to make sure that it's on your radar as we move into the next phase of it. It's at quite a crucial stage. So Donna very nicely showed us a slide on the impact of neglect in early childhood, and that's really demonstrates our rationale for why we're doing this work. And there's a lot of work, a lot of evidence coming out around the impact, longer term health impacts, and lots of other impacts of having adverse childhood experiences. So we've developed a City and Hackney approach. It includes a needs analysis, a vision, a 5-year framework. I think strategy is probably a little bit grand, but it's a program and a whole system approach that is delivered through primarily workforce development initially to support our staff working with children and families. And Matt's going to talk you through some of the approaches that we've been testing on this. But where we are today is that we're about to publish our approach, which you've got in the documents, and they will be sort of out for public consumption, just to make sure that you're happy with them and that you are happy to endorse the approach as we move forward and we look at testing some further interventions and looking at our evaluation as well. So I will hand over to Matt to talk to you a little bit about what we've been doing with Hackney in terms of implementing our training program.
Thanks, Amy. So in terms of the work...
Matt, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Matt Hopkinson. I'm a project manager working for the CCG within the Children, Young People, Maternity and Families work stream, as well as unplanned care, but the CYPMF for today. So just to talk a bit about the workforce development we've been doing. There are 2 key areas that we wanted to address. Whilst there is a lot of good practice and some really good areas of training in City and Hackney, such as the 5 to Thrive tool that Donna mentioned earlier, and we are working with partners to make sure that we're not contradicting or duplicating anything. Many staff who engage with children and families won't have actually had much in the way of training or support on these issues beyond statutory safeguarding training. Also, services often tend to work in isolation from each other, or where there is frequent professional contact, it doesn't necessarily constitute a learning environment. So the workforce development approach has got 2 strands. One is to put together an introductory training module covering what we mean by childhood adversity, trauma and resilience, and reflecting on how this applies to us as individuals and as service providers. And that could be aimed at people who are not necessarily subject experts, but who interact with children and families on a day-to-day basis. So that could be police, it could be children's centre staff, or GP receptionists or nurses, or pretty much anyone. We are also developing a series of more in-depth multidisciplinary training sessions, which looks like an 8-hour course over 4 sessions, bringing together practitioners from different disciplines to reflect on practice through looking at case studies and sharing ideas, problems, and best practice. This is taking a life course focus. So we are looking at, we're bringing together practitioners who work around particular age groups, so perinatal, 0 to 5s, 5 to 11s, etc. so that the training can also function as a space to raise issues and opportunities around connecting those services which overlap and work with the same children and families. We're also using this as a foundation to build a community of practice. It's really important that we foster ongoing dialogue and mutual support and share knowledge between services and encourage more joined up ways of working. So in November, we worked with a group of 11 practitioners from different perinatal focused services, so midwifery, children's mental health, home visiting, colleagues from voluntary and community sector. So we had people from bump buddies and birth companions. And with them, we co-designed a training course which focused on reflective learning and shared experience. As I mentioned, it's a sort of case study focus, and also had a child protection conference simulation to give something really gritty for everyone to focus on. It's a sort of reflective and interactive approach with a small group and facilitated by clinicians and practitioners. The main outcomes that we had from that pilot were everyone involved felt really confident in their practice. In relation to adversity and trauma, people felt that it was a safe space where they could learn from each other, and all the participants fed back that the programme did enable better working practice, particularly when it came to working across sectors. So that's laid the groundwork for a community of practice that we want to continue to foster that dialogue and mutual support. We've set up a forum online based using Slack with the original cohort of practitioners who we worked with on the pilot. And as we roll out further training, everyone who goes through the training will be invited to take part in that community. We've also set up a resource portal which is now live but continues to be developed. And that portal will include all of the training resources, as well as practical tools and resources that can be used by practitioners in the front line with their work on children, with children and young people and families. And also we'll have links to external resources, articles, videos, etc., to foster continuing professional development. The training, as I say, was really well received, and we've had a lot of engagement across the system, and it's been very encouraging that people have been so keen to engage with this work to drive positive change, particularly in the context of the pandemic. I think it says a lot about the importance of getting this right, that there is such momentum in the system at a time when everyone is slammed. So the next steps will be over the next 2 months to roll out the next cohort of training, which will be for 0 to 5s, as well as set up the next rollout of the perinatal. Further age group trainings will be developed over the year. The other thing that we are currently doing, working with the change support team at LBH, is developing a trauma-informed child protection conference pilot, and that is just launching now. We have some training and development sessions next week, and then we will be running the pilot with a family and social workers in City and Hackney. And I think I'll leave it there, if that's okay.
Great, thanks, Matt. So, just having a look, nothing in the chat. Any hands up yet? Glanville, yeah.
Sorry, Matthew. It was really compelling to hear about that work, and I have a declared interest in the sense that I'm a board member of the Shoreditch Trust, who have obviously for a long time supported Bump Buddies, and so it's an organisation, it's a project and a sort of organisation that's close to my heart. I just wonder, in terms of that level of collaboration, I assume funding is coming from all sorts of places in the system to sort of make this happen. But I'm just intrigued a little bit about the interdependencies, and I guess a slight lesson for, and you know, no surprise to Amy, but how we, you know, we've done a huge amount around health and social care integration. Moving into the space around children is sort of our next phase, and I'm really pleased to see Amy sort of nodding. But this is a collaboration, obviously, between, you know, this sort of practice, the community, voluntary sector, and everyone else. And obviously, it could pay real dividends. And I just wanted to touch on that point.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Good. No other hands at the moment. I think it's very thorough. I know that Liz, you sent in a few questions I saw on an email this afternoon. Just to Ms. Hughes, in terms of where the training will be open to VCS workforce as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the intention is that. So, as I said, there were sort of two levels of training. But yeah, the intention is that we want to have the entire health and social care workforce, broadly speaking, whether or not they work for the council or whether they work for voluntary charity community organisations, to have access to awareness and support around child.
Great, and the VCS obviously are involved in shaping the work as well, which is great to see. And again, another comment about asylum seekers and unaccompanied asylum seekers, etc., migrants, and that yet another area of disproportional need.
Chair, just to echo again that it's coordinated across the schools piece, and Orleen Bardou, who works in Hackney, leading on the work of improving outcomes for young black men, thinking about that training, but not just for those children, but all children, and taking that trauma-based approach and the importance of that, and thinking about how we facilitate and talk to children about that. I suppose, Chair, I want to demonstrate that we talk about coordinated work, and it's really good to have lived experience and examples to speak to that. So yeah, I'll just pause there, but thank you, Chair.
No, thank you very much. That's helpful. Good. Okay. And as a in my work, when I'm seeing people, you certainly see the consequences of adverse childhood experiences on adults later in life, and obviously following that all the way through is something which we would like to do in terms of trying to help people and intervene in helpful ways. I'm just speaking there just to see if any other hands go up. No. Okay, so I think some thoughts in the chat about thanking for other resources that have dropped in there. So I think I would imagine that we would be delighted to endorse this work. I will happily take a few nods. I can see most people on the screen. Anyone object? I think they need to put their hand up. I don't know, or write something if they feel confident to do that. But otherwise, I think we would happily endorse it. So thank you both for coming and presenting.
Thank you, Jane.
Righto. So we'll move on to where are we? Sandra Husbands, Public Health Director for City and Hackney, for a verbal update of where we are with the COVID-19 in various regards. Sandra, are you good to go? I can see you, but you are on mute. Over to you.
Yes, I'm sorry, but I made the mistake of coming out without my lead, so I'm a little worried that my computer might go out in the middle of this. So I may ask Deanna to start the update, and I will log in again on my phone, if that's okay.
Okay, Deanna, over to you.
I do apologise.
Good evening, everybody. I am just going to share my screen so you have a chance to follow what I'm saying. Technology permitting. No. Yes.
Whilst we wait, I think we're all having view problems. My screen has been flickering throughout the entire meeting, which is giving me a slightly unusual sort of headache. But I think we're all being one of those days. I think there's the gremlins are about.
Right.
Are we there? Not quite. No, nothing sharing at the moment, Dana.
Yes, it's just waiting. It says it's waiting. Do you mind to wait a few more seconds, minutes?
No, unless you want to start to
yes.
speak. It'll drop in front of us in time.
I can start talking. So I will just give a brief update on what's going on in terms of COVID cases and testing and deaths, as well as some of the NHS statistics locally. So we have seen a very, very sharp increase in the number of cases and some of the NHS statistics locally. So we have seen a very, very sharp increase in the number of cases and the incidence rate. And for everybody's benefit, so incidence rate is the number of cases usually presented per 100,000 population. Why do we bother? Is because when we compare different groups of unequal sizes, for example, if we want to compare across age groups or geographical areas like wards or boroughs, the population size is not the same. So if we just talk about actual number, then it's hardly representative of the population. That's why we usually present it as a rate per 100,000. So it is comparable across. And that's what I'm going to talk about if this loads. So like I said, we saw a really huge spike in the number of cases around coming to Christmas time and around Christmas. Our worst weeks were towards the end of December and the first week of January. And since then, we've seen a decrease in the number of cases, and the rate of decline has picked up in the recent week. So we have seen, if I remember correctly, because my screen has just gone black, and I hope you can still hear me. Yeah, great. So if I remember correctly, our recent data shows around 35% decrease in the number of cases, which is great news. However, we are coming from a very, very high rate. So our rate at some point was over 900 per.
So I think what Diana was trying to say is that the rate was over 900 per 100,000, which it was. It was nearly 1,000 per 100,000 in the early weeks of January, and the current rate has come down to around 435 per 100,000, which is a significant drop, but still really a very high rate. And in the over 60s or 60 plus age group, it's still over 500. It's about 540 per 100,000. So again, that's a very high rate. And we look at that age group separately because that's the group in which we're likely to see the most admissions to hospital, serious illness, and unfortunately deaths. So that's why we separate the 60 plus group from the under 60s. We do know that we've seen a lot of people admitted to hospital who are under 60, but we're still seeing the majority of deaths in the over 60s. So although we've seen the rates come down significantly, we have in the past few weeks also seen an increase in deaths associated with that, as you might have expected actually, with that significantly high increase in cases that Diana was talking about earlier. So having been through that period in the summer and the autumn with very few, we had 20 deaths recorded in one week and 30 in another. So not sure if we've reached the peak of the deaths yet, but it's looking quite different from in the previous peak in last spring when we saw a significant number of deaths, simply because we have we in the NHS, they have a much better way of managing people with severe COVID illness now, so they're much more likely to survive. Dana, do you want to come back in again, or is that it?
I can do if you want to say.
I think we've said enough, unless anybody wanted to hear anything else, just to put that in context of where we are with the whole of London. So we've come down. Our incidence rate is now down to less than the London average. Still not anything to boast about though, because that's really quite high at 473. Sorry, I get my numbers fixed up. 473,000. If people have particular questions, it's probably easiest to do it that way. Otherwise, we just keep talking all afternoon. So if you wanted to ask us something about the variant or something like that, please do.
You're on.
Oh, I'm on mute. I heard some strange noise. I didn't think it was me, but anyway, you got the strange noise now of me speaking. Sorry about that. So thank you, Gianna, for putting the link to the data in the chat for people to see. Any questions? Hands up. We've got a couple. So can I go to Malcolm first, if that's all right? Lydia, then maybe to you.
Could I ask a question about the vaccine, the Oxford vaccine? Simply because there's been some publicity today about the Oxford vaccine not being appropriate for people over 65, and I wonder if there was any evidence base for that.
All I can say about that is I've seen the headline, but I don't know of any scientific evidence behind that.
Okay, thank you.
No, ditto. Lydia.
My question, are there any specific areas within Hackney where the rates are very high?
The infection rates are very high.
Yeah.
Do you want to take that one, Diana?
Yes, you can see that in the link that I've provided. So if you scroll down, there is a map of Hackney. And within there, you can see how rates differ. So at the moment, it's west of the borough. No, east of the borough. And some of the north wards, as well as one of the wards, Haggerston, in the south. Just to note, we had to readjust our cutoffs to include 1,000 plus incidence rate, and that was because we had the rates at over 1,000 in several wards just a few weeks back. At the moment, the map doesn't look so bad because that is only because we have adjusted the color scheme, but really the incidence rates are high throughout the borough. Can you see the chart I'm referring to?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can. It's a bit small, but I can work around it. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Chris. Have we got other hands up? I think Rhea.
Thank you. I just would like to know whether you've found any patterns in the testing, and also can you tell us something about the tracing and isolate and support that's happening in Hackney?
Shall I take this?
Yes.
We have found some patterns. So we've done some statistical analysis on the testing data, and we saw that the likelihood of seeking testing in the first place is lower in areas with high deprivation and among people from diverse communities. Not all of them uniformly, but some of the ethnic groups in particular, including Black residents. But likelihood of testing positive is inversely correlated with that, by which I mean it is actually higher in areas with higher deprivation and among people from the ME communities.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. I think we'll probably have to move on. I just to emphasise the vaccination campaign is continuing apace with 2 community hubs based in primary care. A couple of pharmacists just opening up to do some work. Hamilton Hospital as a base for vaccinating as well. And also we have Westfield and Excel as two of the national mass vaccination sites. So that work is continuing. The first 4 cohorts of the JCVI, the Joint Committee on Vaccines and Immunisations, 4 cohorts continue. So just letting people know that. But there are issues around people, vaccine hesitants and vaccine deniers. There are clear differences between people from various ethnic groups, and certainly the group that is the most anxious about coming forward and having the vaccine from the Afro-Caribbean community, which I appreciate contain many sub-communities, but nonetheless, if you look at the numbers, that's the group which we're looking to do more and more work with in terms of outreach and engagement with, and that's maybe on a one-to-one level when somebody is being vaccinated. And I've done vaccinations with people who say they don't have flu, but this time they've, after some hesitancy, have come forward for their COVID vaccine. And we've had a consultation, and they've said, I'm going to go back and tell my friends and family to come forward too, which I would, endorse and encourage people to do so. And there are other communities that are affected in this way too. And also, I'm just minded to see Tracy Fletcher here, who's the Chief Executive of Homerton, and actually in terms of the most, I mean, everyone is working very hard in the context of the COVID pandemic, but nobody's working harder than those at the Homerton, and we're indebted to them. So thank you, Tracy, and your teams, particularly so. So I'm going to move us on now.
Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome.
I think for the teams really, but yeah, thank you. They all the war teams and the ITU teams working incredibly hard.
They are indeed. They are indeed. So thank you for that. Next on the agenda, I can stop my screen from misbehaving. We shall move on to. Fortunately, I've got some paper here, which is good old-fashioned, but it's quite handy in this situation. Director of Public Health, Chris, thank you for sharing your screen. You seem to be being able to do that. I don't know if you're going to do it again. Director of Public Health, annual report. You're presenting this for us to consider this evening. Thank you. We're going to give it about 10 minutes or so, Chris. So I'm not sure if you want to just give us the highlights, then we take a few questions.
So thank you very much and good evening, everybody. My name is Chris Clever. I'm the Deputy Director of Public Health for the city and also for Hackney. So thank you for the time. We have finished the annual Director of Public Health report for 2019-20. It is an independent report. It is Sandra's report as the Director of Public Health. And Sandra chose to focus on substance misuse, a very important area, which includes alcohol abuse as well. The pandemic got somewhat in the way of producing the final report, and we have managed to now get the report finalised. We are taking a slightly different approach from perhaps traditional Director of Public Health reports, in that we have essentially a 2-part report. So the first part essentially is going to be, and is now published, describes the need for substance misuse and also alcohol treatment services, looking at both the City of London and also Hackney. And then what we have is 6 core principles, and these are the recommendations essentially that Sandra is requesting the board to consider and look at how we can strengthen all of our work to address the need for the substance misuse and alcohol treatment services, and also what we can do to prevent future need from arising. So what I was going to do was really focus on these 6 core principles. The report is in the pack. It's now in the public domain. We are looking to do some promotion of the report so that it does get into both the public domain but also into stakeholders so they can respond. So these principles were developed using the NICE guidance. So NICE is a government organisation with a very high degree of independence that essentially reviews the evidence base and makes recommendations for both health and social care. They issued a number of recommendations over the last 10 years or so about how you can address substance misuse and alcohol abuse as well. And then we've taken these and put them into a fairly plain English version. And this is essentially what we are asking, what Sandra is asking the system and stakeholders to respond to. We'll then be collecting the responses, going out to ask people what they are doing, which is already good practice, what they think they could do more of, and what is getting in the way of addressing the recommendation. So I'm just going to quickly run through them. So the first one is around prevent. There is an awful lot that you can do to prevent substance misuse and people uptaking on illicit substances, especially around price. It's a very key determinant, very key indicator of whether people will be drinking at excess levels. And so increasing the price of alcohol and restricting its supply, especially focusing on some of the marketing that's viewable by children. So our first recommendation is that we should do more to reduce availability of alcohol and illicit substances, and that does mean about street dealers taking substance misuse off sometimes the very visible street corners where you have got low-level substance misuse dealing taking place, but also looking at the whole of the supply chain. The second recommendation is around use of assessment tools. There are some very good tools that have been developed that practitioners can use. So anybody you're going in to see in health and social care or in the voluntary sector can use some very quick, easy to use assessment tools. Audit C is a very good example that's used often in primary care. And you can identify people who are either already using substances at a harmful level or particularly at risk of using substances, and also identifying people who are at risk of taking part in things like county lines, so children who are vulnerable. And we are recommending that these tools need to be implemented across all services who come into contact with residents across education, housing, social care, health and criminal justice settings. So the third recommendation is around dual diagnosis. We did look at trying to give this a slightly more plain English name, but it is a phrase that is well known in health and social care. But essentially people who have got both a substance misuse issue and mental illness are very often pushed from one service to another. Services would often request that, first of all, you need to deal with your substance misuse issue, or you need to deal with your mental illness before you can deal with your substance misuse issue. And we have commissioned new services in City and Hackney to address this, using that dual diagnosis, well-known way of describing it. And what we're recommending here is that people that do have dual diagnosis are assessed for both their substance misuse or their mental illness at least every 12 months, and that they should have an up-to-date treatment plan that covers both substance misuse and mental illness, and that's recorded where a need is identified. So all the people who are working either on the substance misuse side of a resident's need or the mental illness have got some really clear confirmed treatment plans. The fourth one is around Inform. So we have got a new treatment provider. It's a more joined up service. It's providing services to very specific groups of people as well, so that where we've known that we've had underuse of the service. And people do need, everybody who's working in some health, social care, voluntary sector does really need to be able to ensure that they've got up-to-date information, both on the effects of substance misuse and alcohol, but also where they can refer people to get treatment. And so it's making sure that there's a really easy way that people can make a referral to a local service and give a client that they've identified as of being in need an excellent way of accessing the service. And then the last but one is around refer. So when you've done all of the work from 1 to 4 and you've identified people that you've actually got good information that you can give them, you really do need to be able to ensure that that referral is an effective referral. It's just not good enough to say to people, oh, you could benefit from an alcohol treatment intervention, but then not actually giving them the information. And so where you have identified a vulnerability or a substance misuse issue, that actually it is recorded that you've made that referral. So that's recorded on the client's records, and that you've actually follow up, so that you not just make the referral, but you then ask the client, actually, did you manage to attend? How was it? People often need to be referred on a number of occasions, and you need to support them to access that service and benefit from the services that are provided. And then the final one is the fact that we have got a new service provider, and we absolutely need to aspire to make sure that our services provide the best possible treatment outcomes around reducing drug overdoses. They have been on the increase in recent years across London and locally, ensuring that we do get those excellent outcomes of people being abstinent where it's possible, or that we can reduce the harm associated with their substance misuse if abstinence is not possible. And then there's some quite very specific outcomes that we look around, making sure that the bloodborne viruses like HIV, hepatitis C, that there is better identification and people put onto treatments from those. And so we're committing, or wanting the services to commit to ensuring that we get some of the best outcomes in the country for our substance misuse services. So over to you really for discussions about how we best engage with stakeholders and how people will be responding to those recommendations. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Chris. Sorry, I'll just going through the paper. It's very thorough, isn't it? Have I got any hands up? Christopher, Councillor Kennedy.
Thank you.
Sorry, can I just ask, Malcolm and Lydia, you've still got your hands up. I'm assuming they were from before. Is that right? Okay, I'll leave you to decide to leave them up or otherwise. Christopher, do you want to take it away?
Yes, thanks, Chris and Sandra. An excellent piece of work, and it really does speak to what we as a board have been talking about in terms of health in all policies. This piece of work, I think, if you just think about one thing, for example, in that prevent bit at the beginning, actually, in terms of the availability of alcohol, you're looking at when we come to renew our licensing policy as a local authority, you're looking at in there putting in measures that allow us to require people who hold licenses to sell alcohol, especially in our off licenses, actually requiring them not to do those absolutely cheap booze deals that we see, you know, the 2 packs for the price of 5 and all that kind of stuff that goes on. And may actually involve us in some dialogue with, you know, some of the chains. You know, it goes right into areas of policy, but that is where, quite rightly, the work of the Health and Wellbeing Board belongs in some cases, and it's about using our levers, reaching as far as we can into the areas of policy that we all have control over. So this is a really great document that I welcome, that allows us to do things like that and provides a solid, firm evidence base that we can take to other policy making places. Thanks.
That's very helpful, actually. As you say, put it in a good context in terms of some of the ambition for this board's work. I can't see any other. I've got a couple of hands. Bear Glanville and then Sandra Husbands.
2 questions. One, a similar theme to Councillor Kennedy's, which is, under normal circumstances, obviously we have quite an expansive outdoor events kind of program through our parks, and sometimes that does involve commercial income, you know, that comes inevitably from alcohol. And I suppose how to do this in a way that meets these objectives, but recognises that that does have value and also is a positive experience for some people. But there's obviously different types of marketing. And I just wonder if we can also get tripped up with the idea that we're sort of somehow hypocritical in that sort of process. And so just checking that sort of the events team within the council ultimately and others that will be giving this some thought. It's the same principles around single-use plastics, you know, making sure if we're making one promise over here that on the other side that we're able to deliver. And then on Excel and drug overdose, obviously we have a very complex recreational drugs market in Hackney, and traditionally, and perhaps with our street user population, you know, injection, bloodborne virus discussions would obviously be around heroin and other things, but obviously the more club drugs clearly is a different market and a different set of issues. And just checking that we think, you know, I've talked about this before, I think, with you, Chris, but just checking that we're able to address both within this sort of strategy, and just that reassurance for the board.
Do you want to come back on that, Chris? Yeah.
So this is a kind of a new way of doing things, because this isn't the strategy, this is Sandra's report. So what we're going to be doing now is essentially having those conversations both internally within the council, but also amongst stakeholders, the police, as well as the youth service and the NHS, to say, actually, as you outlined, the prevent is a really important part of it. So we want to prevent harm. We don't want to go to zero alcohol consumption. So this is not talking about abstinence. This is talking about responsible drinking in its most truest form. And I think is also talking about where we have got people that are essentially making quite significant profits, that we are also looking for that responsibility, that where there is license fees being paid, we do want to start talking to them about how do you ensure that for the majority of people there will be responsible drinking, but for some there'll be antisocial behaviour, there will be a real treatment need. So I think there is more that we can do in terms of having that conversation with both licensees, the licensing committee, and also parks and events about how do we do some of the recommendations that are recommended here. So that's why we're very keen to do a part 2 of this report around the spring, summertime, depending on how COVID develops, in terms of coming back and saying, well, actually, this is what Parks and Leisure said in response to Sandra's recommendations, and this is actually what we're then going to be committing to, hopefully as a council and a health and wellbeing board, to doing about this. So it is a conversation with ourselves and with others, with a very clear set of recommendations. And then in terms of club drugs and other, so the illicit drugs market is always evolving. There's always new substances. We always need to be relatively vigilant to ensure that we're aware of what's causing the overdoses, the side effects, being open and honest with people about what is known about those substances. The just say no does not work, and you do need to give people up-to-date information. And I think that's also true as well around how we prevent those overdoses, ensuring things like naloxone, which is a fantastic opiate reversal, very easy to administer in the Nepi pen, is available very extensively throughout, not just substance misuse services, but also in homeless outreach teams and others. So I think there is more that we can do around making those information available, and some of the interventions that we know are very effective, of which naloxone is but one. And then in the club drugs, I think there has been such a significant change in the late night economy and the role of club drugs, that it is again going to be an evolving situation as to how much of that used to take place in an alcohol licensed venue and how much of that is now taking place in the home, and then how we need to respond to that emerging and different usage. And the new treatment provider absolutely has a much stronger focus on club drugs, and that will be part of that Excel, is that we do need to be able to report on the uptake by particular protected characteristics, such as gay and bisexual men, young people, different ethnic communities, to make sure we are responding to the need and responding to where we know there's unmet need.
Chris, thank you. I'm aware that it's 5 to 6 and we've got one more agenda item. I wonder if the last 2 hands can put their questions in the comment, and I'll try and pick them up as we go on, because I think we do need to move on, otherwise we're going to end very late.
Well, my comment was very quick. I was going to come in on the licensing point, and Chris has made the point. I just want to add that there's an opportunity to comment on a national policy consultation about the national licensing policy, which is still open at the moment, and it may be worth members looking at that and thinking about what comments they'd like to make on that.
Okay, thank you for drawing that to attention, Sandra. Yes, so I'll move on. So with apologies to Malcolm, Lydia, I think your hand is an old hand from before, and Christopher Kennedy, if you can pop those questions in the chat, I appreciate that, and I'll see if I can pick them up quickly. At the end, we'll see what they say. Donna, I'm going to turn to you and Jane Taylor to do a quick health and wellbeing strategy update and some of the work on the Health Inequality Steering Group. I know we're being asked as a board to consider the timescales and the running of 2 workshops as part of what you're asking us to focus on. So I'll give you sort of 5 minutes to speak, and then we'll take a few questions.
Yep, that's fine. I'm just going to present my screen. For anybody who doesn't know me, I'm Donna Doherty-Kelly. I'm Principal Public Health Specialist at Hackney, and I'm working on the health and wellbeing strategy. Can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Brilliant. So I'll just quickly whiz through this, but just to provide some context to people that weren't in the meetings before, the board meetings before this, we've presented 2 papers in the last 2 health and wellbeing board meetings that have been signed off, and that's generally to use the approach of the health and wellbeing strategy development to create a new sort of population health framework for tackling health inequalities through coordinated system-wide action led by the board. And then in November, the board agreed the proposed approach to developing the strategy. So that was an update on the timeline and the engagement approach and the membership of the working group as well. And within that last meeting, we also agreed that we would, where possible, align a timeline with the City of London's health and wellbeing strategy as well. So in this proposal, we've got 2 workshops proposed, and the first one is more about the development session for the Hackney Health and Wellbeing Board, which we're proposing comes before the strategy workshop. And this is because of the work that the board's doing recently around health and health policies, which you've heard a lot about in this meeting. We've been focusing our last 3 board meetings on wider Hackney policies and thinking about health improvement and health inequalities within those strategies and policies. And we've also agreed to use the King's Fund Population Health Framework to focus the board's work on providing that system leadership for improving health and reducing health inequalities too. So we thought it would be a good time with the expanded board membership, whenever those invites come out, to have a workshop and bring all the board members together to think about what their vision and priorities are for the next year, and just provide a space for members to think about how they work together as a board, particularly thinking about, as I said, the vision, the role of the board, and how we develop the population health framework and the health and health policies work locally as well. So I'm not going to go through the whole workshop outline, but it is in there. I would just point out that in the paper I've said February, but the proposal is March 2021 for that first workshop, and the second workshop after this one would be for Hackney Health and Wellbeing Board members to come together with City Health and Wellbeing Board members and City and Hackney Health and Equality Group steering group members and wider stakeholders that are working on the wider determinants of health to think about prioritisation of drafting priorities for the health and wellbeing strategy prior to sort of working with the communities. And I've also popped quite a bit of information around the outline of that workshop as well, but that will be, there'll be some work that would go behind that in the run-up to that workshop to make sure we've got all the evidence that we can pull together around population health and health inequalities for the members to consider and stakeholders to consider in that workshop, and to think about what those potential draft priorities might be. So the aim would be to sort of come up with a set of priorities at that workshop and to agree on our strategic framework, which would be based on the King's Fund Population Health framework. And for that reason, we thought that it would be a good idea for King's Fund to come along and facilitate that. And welcome to hear your thoughts on that. They obviously developed that framework, so it would be useful, and they've also delivered sessions with other areas and other health and wellbeing boards to develop their strategies. Excuse me. So that's a proposal on those 2 workshops, and then we have included details in previous papers around this, but the idea of having those in March and April is so that when we come to the summertime, we'll have a really good period of nice weather and opportunities to hopefully, maybe I'm being a bit optimistic here, but meet people outside and go out and reach communities through and develop those community insights in the summer months, and help us work with the communities to sort of think about those priorities and whether they're correct, and co-design those together. Again, this is mentioned in the previous papers, but just to highlight that there is probably about a month's worth of work writing up that strategy after the co-production phase, and then we'd move into formal consultation September and October time, looking to sort of for final sign-off and write-up in November 2021. So I'm going to hand over to Jane now in a second, but I guess what we're asking the board is to really consider those workshop timetables, because we would be wanting members to come along. So whether you think that's doable, because if it's not, it will sort of impact the rest of our timelines. Might need to have a think about that. So that's the ask in terms of that bit of the paper, and I'll just hand over to Jane now to chat about.
Do we want to just have a moment just to consider that ask first before we go to Jane, rather than take it all together?
To be honest, Mark, I was going to suggest that you just focus on that, because that's a decision. This is really an update on how the steering group can support the development of the strategy. So I can bring a more detailed update on the work of the Health and Equality Steering Group. I think you might want to spend more time on this, if that's okay with everyone, but happy to take any questions.
And you mean you would come and talk about the work of the Inequality Steering Group on another occasion, you mean?
We'll have more to update on after a workshop next week anyway.
Oh, okay, so let's, if you're happy, thank you for coming.
Yeah. No, that's fine.
And this in discussion, but yes, it would be more sensible to have a bit more proper time to do that, maybe at the next meeting. So let's go. Thank you, Jane, for that. Thoughts about the timetable and the structure for that? Christopher Kennedy.
Hello. Thanks. Yes, I think that the content of both those workshops looks spot on. I'm really glad that you've got the idea of King's Fund coming, certainly to the first one. Please, can we do that? To get one in March, I would say you need to propose a date really quickly and get it in people's diaries really quickly. And if it has to slip into April in order to get more people there, let it slip into April. But there are a lot of people here who already have very full diaries. On one to you, Chair, and joint chairs, actually, we have an expanded membership, and there was an action that, Mark, you said was ongoing to invite the new expanded members of the board. I think it would be really important to have them there and present at the 2 workshop sessions.
Good point. Mayor Ganville, do you want to come in on that point before I do?
Yeah, agree, Chris. I think that's Councillor Kennedy. I think that's really important. I was just going to say I really welcome the approach and the content, and also, as I think we agreed at the last board, of bringing City and Hackney together around this work. I think that's really, really important. I would, this public meeting, careful what I say in terms of channeling Deputy Mayor Renison. I think obviously the ICB's done quite a lot of development work, and in terms of getting maximum stakeholder participation and exciting people about this work and getting them interested, the offer, I think, has to be really strong. And how it's different from some of that work that the ICB has done. And also conscious for people with longer memories than me. Obviously, there was bits of work that we did with the LJ and other things that I may have talked about almost exactly a year ago. So I think we're on a much better footing. I think these meetings are much more focused, and I think the quality of the contributions are absolutely excellent. And this will only enhance that. But there will be some we have to convince of that, probably, especially with busy lives where the pandemic is and everything else. But brilliant work. Thank you.
Yeah, before I ring John Williams in, I just echo that. I think it looks very exciting. I think the King's Fund bit, bringing the city in, being mindful of what the ICB is doing, or ICPB as it will come, and actually our added value. But that's part of the work of the workshop to clarify all that. So I think, and the last thing I would say is that I think it'll be, it'll have to be towards the end of March, even now, for the first one. So almost with the COVID response still being so intense, really, even though it looks like we've got past the peak of the prevalence, the consequences of all that activity is still going to be felt for quite a long time through the system, in terms of kind of people having to cover emergency and extra additional workload. So it might be that, I wouldn't worry too much if it all dropped, into April, then May, and fell a bit further forward. So is in order to make sure we get all the right people there with the right amount of headspace, with the right amount, so to really maximise the actual work of the workshops.
That's really helpful. Thanks,
John. I'm going to give you the last thought and comment before I think we need to go to AOB.
All right, thank you very much, Mark. It's just on the summer engagement. I think this is going to be a real challenge. I mean, you've all been articulately talking about the challenge of the pandemic. It's going to hit us really hard, and trying to get people really involved in this is going to be a challenge, and we're more than happy to work with you. I think the key issue for us is that we don't want this being just a few people involved in it. And that's my fear. It's about how you get the wider communities, particularly those communities experiencing the inequalities that we've seen driven by the pandemic, involved in this. I'm not sure what the answer is, but I do think we all need to collectively figure this out in the workshops, because it's the key thing. It's no point having the strategy if nobody buys into it. And it's very important, given what's been happening over the last year, that people buy into this strategy. Thanks.
Indeed, indeed. So twas ever thus with all strategies, and then we see them actually bear fruit in terms of planning and delivery.
And I completely agree, John, and it's definitely something we're thinking a lot about, and we'll definitely be engaging with you going forward on that.
Thank you.
Okay, right. Thanks, everyone, and I should thank you, Donna and Jane. Malcolm, I see your comment really now as a sort of question from the previous item. I'm sure officers and others have seen that in terms of the sort of outreach street work issue that you described there. So just bring people's attention to that. Thank you, Malcolm. Any other business today? No. Okay, super. Well, in which case we should wrap up now. We're a little over time, so apologies for that. I know one or two people have had to leave to get onto other calls and things, so which is entirely understandable. Just to say that next time we meet will be the 24th of March, 4 till 6. The theme on that occasion will be good work. So it will be interesting to explore some of the issues that flow from that, and give Jane a bit more time to describe some of her work as well. I'm sure it'll be good. But in the meantime, take care, everybody. Thank you for your time and energy and input. See you soon. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.